welcome back to Greyberg. Today, we're going to be covering the murder of Becky Bliefnick, who was tragically shot 14 times in her home in Quincy, Illinois. Her murder has been connected with a contestant from the game show Family Feud, so when this all unfolded in 2023, the media and internet really ate it up. We're going to unpack what happened in the lead up to Becky's murder, and what happened after that ultimately led to a killer's demise. Before we get too far ahead, if you're new to the channel and are interested in more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe as every little bit helps us grow. Without further ado, let's get into today's case. Becky Bliefnick was born Rebecca Possel on the 19th of November 1981 in Quincy, Illinois to parents Bernadette and William Possel. She had one sibling, an older sister named Sarah, and the two of them were raised in a loving household where both daughters learned to be selfless and caring people. After graduating from Quincy Notre Dame High School as valedictorian, Becky went on to study biological science at Quincy University. After completing her degree, she took work as a sales representative for a globally recognized pharmaceutical company named Sanofi. During her time at Quincy University, she had met a man named Tim Bliefnick, and the two of them became good friends and eventually began dating 2 years after they graduated. Timothy Bliefnick was born in Decatur, Illinois on the 26th of April in 1983 to parents Amy and Raymond Bliefnick. He was the middle sibling of 3 boys, and after graduating high school in 2002, he went to Quincy University where he played football for the school team, the Hawks. He was a linebacker for the team with a career total of 287 tackles, the 4th best in school history. He was an NAIA All-American Scholar Athlete, and his dedication to the sport saw him win an award for being the most outstanding sportsman at the college in his senior year. There was no doubt that he was talented, and his incredible record eventually secured him a spot in the school's Hall of Fame in 2019. After graduating in 2005, he went on to work in sales at Quincy Farm Products, a career which he excelled at. He was your classic all-American man, but he wasn't just handsome and good at football, he was also charismatic and responsible. This was the man that Becky saw and was attracted to. Tim had it all figured out. The couple's relationship started strong, they were both smitten with each other, and things were moving quickly. Still living in Quincy, they moved in together before eventually getting married in 2009. Becky's sister said, quote, "Becky's wedding was beautiful. She was so happy. Tim was a responsible guy. He had a job. They had a house. She was over the moon." Over the next few years, Becky gave birth to 2 beautiful boys named Deacon and Grayson. At this point, Becky was still working in pharmaceutical sales, but she decided to leave this position and work as a stay-at-home mother. Tim had moved on from Quincy Farm Products and entered the recycling field, moving his way up to a marketing position at a company called Quincy Recycling. Everything appeared to be going well for the Bliefnick family, but behind the scenes, as time passed, Becky had become tired of working as a stay-at-home mother. She wanted to go back to school and train to become a nurse. This didn't sit well with Tim, who wasn't sold on the idea, but it didn't matter because Becky had made up her mind, and so she enrolled at Blessing Riemann College of Nursing and Health Sciences to become a nurse. During the spring break of her senior year, she gave birth to her and Tim's 3rd child, another boy who they named Arlen. When she graduated, she found work as a nurse at Blessing Hospital, and during the pandemic she began working as a traveling nurse for 2 hospitals in Missouri, which she received a Daisy Award for. On top of all of this, she volunteered for a school organization and an animal rescue group. As you can probably tell from her line of work and humanitarian efforts, she was a very motivated person, and really the best word for her is caring. She was a selfless, nurturing person, and this led her to great success as a nurse and really motivated her to care for those in need. Unfortunately for the Bliefnick family, Tim and Becky's relationship eventually soured. They began fighting about everything you can imagine, and they found themselves in this toxic relationship that they were both unhappy in. Their troubles ultimately led to Tim filing for divorce. Becky's sister Sarah claims that Becky began feeling discontent with her marriage due to Tim's increasingly controlling behavior and lack of help around the house. Despite Tim being the one who filed for divorce, the marriage had reached a boiling point, and if it wasn't Tim who filed, then it likely would have been Becky. As their divorce proceedings continued, the couple began living apart in February of 2021, with Tim moving into a separate home about a mile away. The divorce was messy from the beginning. They both had protection orders taken out against one another and were forbidden from going to the other person's house unless it was for their children. Everything came to a head on the afternoon of the 23rd of February in 2023, when Tim called Becky's father William to let him know that the kids' school had called him to say that Becky hadn't picked the children up. William decided to swing by his daughter's house to check on her, and when he got there, he found the front door unlocked, and when he entered, he discovered her lifeless body on the floor of the bathroom. Becky was 41 years old, and an autopsy determined that she had been shot 14 times in total. It wasn't a quick death either. None of her wounds were instantly fatal, so she was alive for minutes after being shot, and likely died a painful death. Her passing devastated her loved ones and shocked the community. especially because Quincy is typically quite a safe place. Obviously, every area has crime, but in Quincy, untargeted violent crime is rare. It was without a doubt an unfathomable tragedy, but what immediately struck law enforcement as suspicious was the timing of her death, which was conveniently just over a week before her and Tim's scheduled divorce trial. The investigation into Becky's murder began straight away, and detectives quickly found out that criminals had broken into the home through an upstairs window leading to one of the children's bedrooms. The top floor window was forced open, and so was Becky's bedroom door. They estimated that the intruder or intruders entered the house at around 1:11 a.m. on the morning of the 23rd. Police knew this because Becky tried to call 911 at 1:11 a.m., so it's likely the intruder was already in the house at this time. They found her phone behind the bedroom door, and it looked like it had landed there after being knocked out of her hand, so police were of the belief that there was a violent struggle. Nothing had been taken from the house, so the idea of a robbery was out of the question, and no neighbours had heard or seen anything either, so there wasn't a whole lot to go off. Detectives found a partial shoe print near the point of entry, 8 spent 9mm bullet casings, and little fragments of plastic near Becky's body. But that was it. There was no murder weapon, and they had very limited physical evidence in this case, so they were desperate for a solid lead. Trying to piece it all together, they canvassed neighbouring houses for surveillance footage, and they got lucky pretty early on in the investigation when they spoke to Becky's neighbour. This neighbour had surveillance down the side of their house, and this surveillance partially captured the side of Becky's house as well. The footage recovered from the camera didn't show anything on the night of Becky's murder, but it did capture something almost 24 hours earlier. At 1:05 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd, someone is seen walking down the neighbour's driveway towards the back of Becky's house. You can't see who it is because it's dark, blurry, and they're wearing clothes that mask their identity, but they are seen again 48 minutes later walking in the opposite direction. A similar incident was captured on the 14th of February, about a week earlier. The neighbours noticed the prowler and had let Becky know, so everyone was on edge a little bit, but they just chalked it up as someone lurking around looking for stuff to steal. Nobody could have imagined that just over a week later, Becky would be killed. This CCTV was a win for law enforcement though, and despite it being impossible to identify the person from the footage, they were going to exhaust every lead they could, and the CCTV was the best lead they had. Their inquiries uncovered more CCTV from a nearby house and the Quincy bus barn, and by stitching all of this footage together, they were confident they'd identified their suspect on all 3 bits of tape. Whilst they didn't have footage of the person going down the driveway next to Becky's house on the night of the murder, there was footage of who they suspected was the same person riding to and from the direction of Becky's house around the time of her murder. The area where they pulled the CCTV from, the Quincy bus barn, it's not really an area residents would be riding a bike late at night, especially in the middle of winter, so this just strengthened their theory that it was the same person. They were spotted on the 14th of February and then on the 21st, the 22nd and the 23rd, with the 23rd being the day that Becky was killed. They were always coming and going from the same direction for roughly the same amount of time on a recurring basis. In hindsight, they were obviously casing the house, or perhaps they already had their plan and were just trying to work up the courage. Who knows? Even with this CCTV, law enforcement had nothing more than a rough timeline and potential supplementary evidence if they were somehow able to magically identify the killer. They had a few potential movements of their suspect, but because you can't tell who it is, it was basically worthless. They had been looking at a few potential suspects for Becky's murder, mainly Tim, but also her new boyfriend, a guy named Ted Johnson. Becky and Ted were kind of a new relationship, but this didn't rule him out. So police obviously wanted to speak with Ted, not only to rule him out, but also to try and get a better understanding of Becky's relationship with Tim. And they did. They went and spoke with Ted and conducted a gunshot residue test on his hands. He was very cooperative and even handed over his phone for analysis. Tim was pretty cooperative as well. Detectives went and spoke to him on the day of Becky's murder, but for some reason they didn't bother to take a gunshot residue test of Tim's hands, only Ted's. I'm not sure if this was an error, like whether they just forgot or whether they didn't think it was necessary. By the time they had gotten around to going to Tim's house, Becky had been dead for more than 6 hours, so the test may have been pointless. Surely you'd still conduct one anyway, even if it was less accurate. With no solid suspect, this meant police had to go back to the drawing board and try and find another lead. Becky's sister Sarah pointed them in the right direction when police spoke with her. She told them about Becky's troubles with Tim during their relationship, and after speaking with her, I bet they wish they'd done a gunshot residue on Tim. So, according to Sarah, Becky and Tim's relationship had been on a downward trajectory, basically since Becky had decided to go and be a nurse. Tim didn't like the idea of her being a nurse, or splitting the household responsibilities with her. It was a sore spot for the couple for quite a while, and as we know, it ultimately led Tim to filing for divorce after 11 years of marriage. In the months that followed their separation, Becky texted a friend saying this about Tim. "He has screamed in my face, he shoved me in front of the kids, and has thrown things across the room." And to another she said, "I truly believe Tim has serious mental health problems and he is becoming more vengeful and unpredictable." According to Tim, Becky had begun spreading rumours about him having affairs and being an alcoholic, but he denied the claims and said that this was Becky acting spiteful after the divorce. He actually went and tried to get a protection order against Becky for harassment and stalking, but this was subsequently rejected. Just days after this, Becky sent her sister an eerie text which read, "If something ever happens to me, make sure the number one person of interest is Tim. I am putting this in writing that I'm fearful he will somehow harm me." Eventually, Becky filed a protection order against Tim for entering her house without permission, but surprise, surprise, this order was denied as well. A judge drew a line in the sand and ordered that the two of them stay away from each other, outside of handing the kids over to one another. The judge also ordered that Tim return a 9mm handgun that Becky had given him previously. Becky never got this gun back, but if you remember from before, there were 9mm bullet casings found at the scene. Could this gun have been the crucial piece of evidence that police were searching for? Unfortunately, we'll never know because nobody ever got their hands on this gun. Once Sarah told police all about Tim and Becky's relationship, he shot right up to the top of their suspect list. Authorities continued their investigation, and a few days later, they discovered a bike less than half a block from Tim's house. The bike had no reflectors on the wheels, which matched the one shown in CCTV going to and from the direction of Becky's house the night she was murdered. But was this just a coincidence? They were able to get a search warrant for Tim's house, and on March 13th, 2023, Tim Bliefnick was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of home invasion. The case was really big news at the time, partly fueled by the fact that Tim and his family had previously appeared on the game show Family Feud. During their appearance, he made a questionable remark about his wife, and I think he was trying to make a joke, but it didn't really land, and with hindsight, it's obviously super concerning.
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. Not my mistake. I love my wife.
This episode was filmed in 2019, so it was 2 years before he filed for divorce, but it definitely caught the attention of the media, and it does just make you look at the whole thing in a completely different light. Tim's alibi was that he was at home with their 3 kids when the murder took place. Becky had asked Tim to hold the kids for an extra night, but investigators believed that this was less of an alibi and more of an opportunity that Tim saw to go and kill Becky. And if it was Tim who killed her, he would have known to enter through one of the children's bedrooms because obviously they weren't there. How would a random intruder know to enter through that specific window? They could have very easily just gone through Becky's window, but it's like they knew. All things considered, with the lack of physical evidence pointing towards Tim, it was going to be exceptionally difficult to prosecute him for Becky's murder. Police tried to make the most of the evidence they did have. In relation to the partial shoe print that they found, detectives seized a bunch of shoes from Tim's house to have them compared, but unfortunately none were a match. They also took every single pair of gloves belonging to Tim that they could find, and none of them returned anything that could link him to Becky's murder. There was nothing tying Tim to the murder at all whatsoever, but he was still being held in jail awaiting trial. He denied any involvement in the crime and was adamant he didn't and couldn't fathom killing his wife. And that was exactly what the jury would be facing, coming to terms with the fact that a man could murder the mother of his 3 children. Tim insisted that it was not him in the CCTV. It was not him on the bike, and the bike they found he claimed to have no connection to. Police disagreed, however, claiming that they had uncovered a burner Facebook account of Tim's which had inquired about purchasing a bike similar to the one they found. There was an increasing amount of circumstantial evidence like this that had been accumulating over the investigation. So when Tim's trial came around, prosecutors were going to give it all they had to prove Tim's guilt. I've already been over some of the evidence already, but I'll just outline it all again quickly so that you can really get a sense of what the jury were working with. Tim's trial began on the 23rd of May in 2023, and the prosecution first went over the plastic fragments found at the scene which investigators determined were fragments from an Aldi grocery bag. They noted that Tim had a bunch of Aldi bags at his house, and suggested that he may have used the bag to muffle the noise of his gun or to catch the shell casings. There was DNA recovered from the bag, and an expert testified that it was more than likely Tim contributed to DNA left behind on the bag. There was also DNA found under Becky's fingernails which couldn't be ruled out as belonging to Tim, but because none of it could be confirmed 100%, it wasn't conclusive. The prosecution also noted that during the investigation, a crowbar was recovered from Tim's basement. There were plenty of other crowbars there too, but this one was the only one which appeared to be freshly used, so it was sent off for analysis. They brought in an expert who analysed the crowbar alongside the pry marks on the window at Becky's house, and she testified that there were microscopic consistencies, but ultimately the results were inconclusive. Bringing this expert in though was still quite damaging to the defence because it threw even more doubt into the mix, and the jury, even though the expert didn't say it was a conclusive match, are now wondering if it could have been. The trial took an unexpected turn when the prosecution began presenting what they believed the motive of Tim to be. They said that it was more than money and custody involved in the murder, and that it was actually to do with Tim's father, Ray. The prosecution alleged that during the upcoming divorce trial, it was going to come out that Becky didn't want the children to be around Ray unsupervised. They didn't go into all the details at the trial, but online sources claim Ray had a, quote, history of perversion and abusing minor children, and Rebecca was allegedly afraid he would run off with the children. This was allegedly something from his past, and none of Tim and Becky's children were involved, but Becky had actually sought a protection order against Ray, which was shockingly denied. The prosecution claimed that all of this was why Tim killed Becky. He didn't want all of this to come out about his father and felt like he was losing control of the situation. The court heard that Becky texted a friend on May 9th, 2021, saying, quote, Tim told me if I outed his dad that he, Ray, would probably have to move and then would kill himself. Tim's attorney claimed that this motive wasn't entirely logical because the information about Ray and the past abuse was already on the public record, so Tim really had nothing to lose at this point as the information was already out there. If Tim did kill Becky, I think that this obviously would have contributed to his decision to kill her, and maybe it was just the culmination of things that drove him over the edge. But I think what's not up for debate is the emotion behind it all, and that's anger. I think Tim was angry that he'd lost control of a woman he used to control, and I think Becky just wasn't giving into his bullshit anymore and was about to take full custody of the children. Honestly, the way in which the prosecution displayed each bit of evidence really helped tell a story without any pictures. What really put the nail in Tim's coffin though was a bunch of incriminating online searches that he had made. Some of them include how to open my door with a crowbar, how to make a homemade pistol silencer, and how to clean gunpowder off your hands. I mean, you can probably tell by some of his spelling, but if you haven't picked it up already, he's really stupid. And what's even more stupid is that he made over 200 searches for Becky's new boyfriend Ted's car number plate and VIN number. He did this right after the prowler was seen on the neighbor's CCTV, just over a week before Becky's murder, when Ted was parked in Becky's driveway. It could be a massive coincidence, but it's definitely suspicious when you consider the timing, because it looks like he went there, saw the car, and then came home and started searching it up. Another major piece of evidence presented at the trial was a comparison between the spent shell casings found at the scene and spent shell casings found at Tim's home. When authorities went through Tim's house, they found a box of 9mm ammunition which matched the shell casings found at the scene. 54 shell casings were found in Tim's basement, and an expert came into the trial and testified that 27 of these shell casings had been fired from the same gun that fired the shell casings found at the scene. When a gun is fired, it leaves behind a quote-unquote fingerprint on the shell casing, and this is how the expert determined that the casings found at Tim's house matched those found at the scene. Tests like these are subject to human error though, so it wasn't as damning as it sounds, but it was definitely not looking good for old Timothy at this point. It didn't stop there either. They also got another expert witness to come in and testify about Tim's electronic devices in relation to the person seen on the CCTV. They pulled data from his phone, laptop, and fitness tracker armband and correlated the timings with those of the person from the CCTV, and they all lined up seamlessly. Basically, every time the person was seen riding the bike, all Tim's devices had gone silent beforehand and then become active again afterwards. The Whoop fitness tracker was the most damning of all because without fail, every time the person on the bike was seen on the CCTV, Tim's fitness tracker had shut off just beforehand. Not only did it line up perfectly in that sense, but there was also no significant gaps of time where the Whoop was disconnected on any other days the expert reviewed. So it wasn't like Tim was taking it off routinely. There was a great amount of contention in the court about Tim's devices, because again, it wasn't really concrete stuff here. All they could say for certain was that Tim's armband had not been connected to his phone during certain periods. They couldn't say what Tim was doing, let alone what the person in the CCTV was doing. They had no idea where he was coming from, where he was going, nothing. Just an educated guess that they were going to Becky's house. All things considered though, I think the prosecution was doing pretty well despite their lack of evidence, but there was undoubtedly going to be a reasonable amount of contention from the jury. When it came time for the defense to plead their case, they didn't call a single witness to the stand. This was allegedly to do with time and money constraints, but as it turns out, it may have helped Tim's case. After 6 days of the trial, the jury went away to deliberate, although initially they struggled to reach a decision. One juror was undecided, but eventually they came around and a guilty verdict was read to the courtroom. Tim filed an appeal while awaiting sentencing, and when it came time for him to be sentenced, the judge handed him life in prison without the possibility of parole for the rest of his natural life. 6 members from Becky's family gave victim impact statements at Tim's sentencing. Becky's mother said, quote, "When you murdered their mother, you took away the person who loved them the most. Your soul is black with hate, and you should never be allowed to be free again." Something that Becky's sister Sarah mentioned, which I agree is super messed up, is that Tim basically set up Becky's dad William to go and find her body because Tim was the one that told him about the school calling him. The lives of the children were destroyed because of this, and I just hope with time that they can heal. They're now living with Becky's parents, and there's actually a GoFundMe which I'll leave a link down below to if you want to help out. They lost both of their parents because their father wanted to be selfish and couldn't bear to deal with his emotions. My heart just really goes out to them. Becky seemed like such a beautiful person who was taken away far too soon. I hope that everyone who knew her is able to fully heal someday, and if anything, I just want her to be remembered properly for all the lives she touched during her life. That's all from me on this case, guys. I know it's heartbreaking, but I truly hope you were able to take something away from this video. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this case in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video and want to stay up to date with when I post next, make sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.